The rain had stopped only an hour before sunrise. Tiny drops still clung to every leaf outside Blackthorn Manor, turning the old gardens into a sea of silver. The air smelled of wet earth, crushed rosemary, and the faint sweetness of blooming jasmine that climbed the stone walls. Somewhere in the distance, a blackbird sang its morning song, while the wind carried the soft scent of pine from the hills beyond the estate. Inside the library, Adrian Ashcombe, Earl of Blackthorn, stood silently beside the tall window. He was 31 years old. His dark brown hair had grown longer than fashion required, brushing the collar of his white shirt. His gray eyes looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from years of pretending to enjoy a life that no longer felt like his own. A letter rested in his hand. His aunt's elegant handwriting covered the page. There is a young woman living at Rosebrook Estate. She is said to be gentle, honest, and devoted to her family. I ask only that you meet her before deciding your future. He folded the letter slowly. He had read words like these too many times. Gentle, kind, graceful. Every introduction sounded the same. Yet every ballroom had ended alike. The smiles became brighter when they learned his title. The conversations became sweeter when they heard the size of his fortune. No one seemed interested in Adrian himself. Only the Earl. Only Blackthorn. He placed the letter into the fire. The edges curled black before disappearing into glowing ash. His steward, Mr. Wallace, entered quietly. You burned it again, my lord? I did. The lady may truly be different. Adrian smiled faintly. So they always say. Wallace hesitated. What will you do? Adrian looked toward the rain-covered gardens. I'll go. The old steward blinked. You will? Yes. Relief spread across Wallace's face. Shall I prepare the carriage? No. The household guards? No. The blue coat embroidered with your family crest? Adrian shook his head. I won't go as the Earl. Silence settled between them. Finally Wallace sighed. You've already decided. I have. You mean to disappear again? For a few days. Wallace rubbed his forehead. I am getting too old for your adventures. You said that 3 years ago. I meant it then as well. A small laugh escaped Adrian's lips. It was the first genuine laugh Wallace had heard in months. I need to know, Adrian said quietly. I've spent years meeting women who prepared for an earl. I want to meet someone who prepares for no one. Wallace nodded slowly. Then he disappeared into the servants' quarters. An hour later he returned carrying worn clothes that had once belonged to an elderly gardener who had retired the previous autumn. The jacket was plain brown. The boots were faded with years of mud. The gloves had been patched more than once. No one will recognize you in these. That's the idea. Wallace handed him an old straw hat. You'll need a name. Adrian looked toward the gardens where the retired gardener had once worked every morning before sunrise. What was his name? Elias. Adrian smiled. Elias then. Wallace frowned. I hope the real Elias never hears about this. So do I. By noon, the Earl of Blackthorn no longer looked like an earl. He looked like an ordinary traveler whose hands had spent years turning soil. He carried only a small canvas bag containing 2 shirts, a comb, a shaving razor, and a few silver coins. No family ring. No jeweled watch. No sword. Nothing that whispered wealth. His horse was not the famous black stallion every nobleman recognized. Instead, he borrowed an older chestnut mare used by the stable workers for errands around the nearby villages. She walked calmly, never demanding attention. Much like the man riding her. The road to Rosebrook Estate wound through quiet forests washed clean by the night's rain. Puddles reflected the pale afternoon sky. Wildflowers nodded beneath droplets of water. The smell of damp moss rose from the shaded woods. For the first time in many months, Adrian breathed deeply. No servants followed. No guards watched. No one bowed as he passed. He felt strangely light. As evening approached, the estate finally appeared beyond a line of ancient oak trees. It wasn't grand. Its stone walls were weathered. Several roof tiles needed replacing. One side of the wooden fence leaned dangerously toward a field of lavender. Yet everything looked cared for. Someone loved this place. Smoke curled gently from the kitchen chimney. Fresh herbs hung beneath the windows to dry. Rows of vegetables stretched neatly across the gardens. Adrian guided the mare toward the side entrance instead of the front drive. A young stable boy looked up from carrying a bucket of water. He couldn't have been older than 13. Good afternoon, sir. Afternoon. Adrian lowered his voice. I've been traveling since dawn. The boy studied him curiously. I was hoping to ask whether your estate might need another pair of hands for a few days. What sort of work? Whatever needs doing. The boy scratched his head. I suppose you'd better ask Miss Eleanor. Eleanor? The master's daughter. Before Adrian could ask another question, the boy pointed toward the far gardens. There. Across the estate, near a neglected rose garden, a young woman knelt beside broken flower beds. She wore a faded green dress with sleeves rolled neatly above her elbows. A linen apron covered the front of her skirt. Loose strands of chestnut hair escaped the braid resting over one shoulder. Her hands were covered with soil. She wasn't arranging flowers. She was digging. Beside her lay a stack of cracked stones, a wooden shovel, and several bundles of fresh rose bushes waiting to be planted. She looked up only when the stable boy called her name. Eleanor. She brushed a strand of hair behind one ear before walking toward them. She moved with steady confidence. Not hurried. Not graceful for appearance. Simply practical. As she approached, Adrian noticed something unexpected. There was dirt across one cheek. She hadn't noticed it. Or perhaps she simply didn't care. You were asking for work? She asked. Her voice was warm but direct. I was. What kind? I've worked in gardens. She glanced at his boots. Then at his worn gloves. Finally at his hands. Most ladies would have looked at his face. She examined his palms. Hands revealed more truth than clothing. You've done real work. I have. Can you prune climbing roses? Yes. Repair stone borders? I can try. She smiled. That's an honest answer. It wasn't a dazzling smile. It was small. Almost shy. Yet it reached her hazel eyes. My father always says a man who admits what he doesn't know usually learns faster than one who claims to know everything. She looked toward the damaged flower beds. I could use another pair of hands. I'd be grateful. We can't pay much. I didn't ask for much. Good. She offered her hand without hesitation. I'm Eleanor Hart. He accepted it gently. Her grip was firm. Her fingertips were rough from gardening. Nothing about her felt rehearsed. I'm Elias, he replied. She nodded once. Then come along, Elias. She picked up another shovel. The roses won't plant themselves. Together they walked toward the old garden. The evening breeze carried the fragrance of lavender and rain-soaked earth around them. Adrian glanced at the rows of dying roses waiting to be saved. Then at the young woman already kneeling in the soil before he had even reached her side. No curtsy. No practiced smile. No curious questions about his family. Only work waiting to be done. As he knelt beside her and pushed the shovel into the softened earth, he realized something that surprised him. For the first time in years, no one was treating him like an earl. And somehow, it felt exactly like coming home. Far beyond the gardens, hidden among the distant trees, a lone rider watched the estate for only a moment before turning his horse toward the western road. He carried a sealed message. One that would soon place Rosebrook Estate in greater danger than anyone inside its quiet walls could yet imagine. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale mist. Soft white fog drifted across the gardens until every rose bush seemed to float above the earth. The grass sparkled with dew, and the scent of damp lavender mixed with fresh bread drifting from the kitchen windows. Somewhere beyond the orchard, a rooster crowed while sheep stirred lazily in their pasture. Adrian woke before sunrise. The small room above the old carriage house was simple. A narrow wooden bed stood beneath a tiny window. A single wool blanket lay folded at its foot, and an old wash basin rested on a crooked table. He had slept better there than he had inside Blackthorn Manor in years. When he stepped outside, Eleanor was already working. She knelt beside the newest rose bushes, carefully tying young stems to wooden stakes so the wind would not snap them. You rise early, Adrian said. She smiled without looking up. So do gardeners. He laughed softly. I suppose they must. She handed him a coil of twine. These need tying before the sun grows warm. Together they worked in peaceful silence. Birdsong filled the morning air. The smell of fresh soil clung to their clothes. Every now and then Eleanor quietly pointed toward another plant. That one. Careful with those roots. Not too tight. She never ordered. She simply guided. By midday they had restored nearly half the neglected garden. The stable boy hurried toward them carrying 2 slices of warm bread wrapped in cloth. Miss Eleanor. She accepted them with a grateful smile. Thank you, Thomas. She handed one piece to Adrian. You've earned this. The bread was still warm from the oven. Butter melted across its surface. Adrian tasted it slowly. I've attended banquets where the tables held 100 dishes. And? This is better. She laughed. A hungry man always says that. No. He looked toward the gardens. A peaceful man says it. Her smile lingered for only a second before fading. The word seemed unfamiliar to her. That afternoon Adrian carried fresh stones toward the old fountain while Eleanor disappeared into the house. As he passed an open doorway, voices stopped him. Another payment due next week. The speaker was an elderly housekeeper. We have nothing left. We still have Mother's necklace. Eleanor's voice answered quietly. The housekeeper gasped. You can't mean that. It has been sitting in a drawer for 7 years. It belonged to your mother. And these workers belong to families who must eat. Silence followed. Then Adrian heard a drawer open. Tiny pieces of jewelry touched one another with a soft metallic sound. I'll sell it tomorrow? No one must know. The Earl stood motionless outside the hallway. His chest tightened. She wasn't saving family treasures. She was sacrificing them. Not for herself. For the people who worked beside her. He walked away before either woman noticed him. That evening he found Eleanor repairing an old wheelbarrow beside the barn. You seem tired, he said. She tightened another bolt. I'm only thinking. About the gardens? She smiled faintly. I wish it were only the gardens. He wanted to ask more. Instead he picked up the hammer beside her. May I? She studied him for a moment. You don't mind dirty hands. I've discovered I rather like them. She handed him the hammer. For the next hour they repaired broken tools together. The setting sun painted the fields gold. The scent of wild mint drifted from the stream beyond the meadow. At last Eleanor sat upon an overturned barrel. My father believes every problem can wait until tomorrow. And you? I've learned tomorrow usually arrives sooner than expected. There was sadness in her voice. Not bitterness. Only exhaustion. The following morning Adrian walked into the nearby village to purchase new nails for the garden fence. The village square bustled with life. Children chased one another between market stalls. Fresh apples filled woven baskets. Blacksmiths hammered glowing iron. The smell of roasted chestnuts drifted through the cool air. Adrian entered the village inn for a mug of cider. He had barely taken his first sip when 2 finely dressed gentlemen entered. One wore a dark crimson riding coat trimmed with expensive velvet. The other carried an ivory walking cane despite having no need for it. They chose the table directly behind him. Has Hart agreed yet? The older man asked. The younger one smiled. He'll agree. And the daughter? She has little choice. Adrian kept his eyes fixed on his cup. You sound confident. I know desperate people. The younger man's voice carried cold amusement. Rosebrook Estate is drowning in debt. The old man cannot save it. So you'll marry the daughter. If necessary. The older man chuckled. You've no interest in marriage. I have every interest in the land. A map unfolded across the table. The southern fields border the new railway route. The land alone will triple in value. And the girl? The younger man shrugged. She'll become Lady Whitmore. If she proves troublesome. He lifted his shoulders carelessly. There are schools in London where lonely wives spend most of their time. The 2 men laughed quietly. Adrian's fingers tightened around his mug. He finally knew the man's name. Edward Whitmore. A wealthy neighboring landowner. Not seeking a wife. Seeking property. After several minutes they left the inn. Adrian remained seated. The cider suddenly tasted bitter. When he returned to Rosebrook that evening, he found Eleanor alone in the orchard. She stood beneath an old pear tree watching leaves drift through the breeze. You've been quiet today, she said. So have you. She smiled sadly. I received another letter. Bad news. My father has been invited to dine with Mr. Whitmore next week. She looked toward the fading sky. I know what he'll discuss. Adrian remained silent. My father thinks marriage could save our estate. And what do you think? She picked up a fallen pear leaf. I think a home saved without love becomes another kind of prison. The wind carried the leaf away. I don't wish to marry for land. Nor for money. Nor because someone believes I should be grateful. She looked at Adrian. I'd rather lose everything than wake every morning beside someone who sees me as another possession. He searched her face. There was fear there. But also remarkable courage. You've thought about this often. Every night. The sun disappeared beyond the hills. For several moments neither of them spoke. Finally Eleanor broke the silence. May I ask you something? You may. You've traveled. A little. Have you ever loved someone? The question caught him completely unprepared. He looked toward the fading light. I don't think so. And if you did? I imagine. He paused. I imagine love would make titles seem very small. She watched him carefully. You don't speak like a gardener. His heartbeat stumbled. What does a gardener sound like? She smiled. I don't know. But probably not like that. He forced a laugh. Perhaps I spend too much time talking to flowers. Perhaps. She looked unconvinced. That night Adrian lay awake staring at the wooden ceiling above his bed. The lie had grown heavier each day. When he first arrived, pretending had seemed harmless. Now every conversation made the deception feel deeper. He remembered Eleanor selling her mother's necklace. He remembered her feeding workers before herself. He remembered the quiet determination in her eyes whenever she believed no one was watching. She trusted him. Not because he was an Earl. Because she believed he was simply Elias. Outside his window the wind rustled through the rose bushes they had planted together. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow. He would tell her everything. Whatever happened afterward. She deserved the truth. Far below, hidden beyond the stone wall surrounding Rosebrook Estate, another rider pulled his horse to a stop beneath the shadows of an ancient oak. Edward Whitmore unfolded a fresh letter beneath the moonlight. A slow smile crossed his face. So, he whispered. The Earl of Blackthorn plans to visit Rosebrook before month's end. He folded the letter carefully. Then I must ensure he arrives too late. The horse turned toward the darkness. Hooves faded into the night. Unseen by anyone inside the quiet estate, the first move of a far more dangerous game had already begun. Dawn arrived beneath a sky washed clean by the night's rain. Mist drifted through the orchard where young pear trees stood silent beneath glistening leaves. The air carried the scent of wet grass, cedar bark, and blooming roses that Adrian and Eleanor had planted together only days before. Somewhere beyond the fields, a skylark welcomed the morning while the soft breeze whispered through rows of lavender. Adrian had not slept. The truth had become heavier than the disguise itself. He found Eleanor in the rose garden before breakfast. She was trimming dead blossoms with careful hands, placing each faded flower into a wicker basket. She smiled when she saw him. Good morning, Elias. The name struck him harder than ever before. He walked toward her slowly. There is something I should have told you the day we met. She stopped pruning. Her hazel eyes rested quietly on his face. What is it? He removed his old straw hat. My name isn't Elias. Silence settled over the garden. My name is Adrian Ashcombe. She frowned slightly. The Earl of Blackthorn. The pruning shears slipped from her fingers. They landed softly among the grass. For several long seconds she simply stared at him. The breeze moved loose strands of her hair across her face. She did not brush them away. You. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. You're the Earl? Yes. The one my aunt keeps mentioning in her letters. Yes. The man everyone believes will visit this estate. I already have. Her expression changed slowly. Not anger at first. Only disbelief. Then hurt. Deep quiet hurt. You knew who I was. Yes. And I knew nothing about you. He lowered his eyes. I wanted to meet someone who didn't see my title first. So you lied. I did. You watched me speak openly. Yes. You listened while I spoke about my family, our debts, my fears. Every answer felt heavier. Yes. Tears gathered in her eyes. Not dramatic. Not loud. Only honest. I trusted you. I know. You should have trusted me enough to tell me. He had no defense. Only regret. I am sorry. She stepped backward. I need you to leave. Eleanor. Please. Her voice remained gentle. That somehow hurt even more. I cannot decide what is true anymore. She picked up the basket of roses. Without another word, she walked toward the house. Adrian remained standing alone among the flowers. The fragrance that had once brought him peace now reminded him only of what he had broken. Later that afternoon, a carriage arrived carrying Edward Whitmore. His polished boots barely touched the ground before he walked confidently toward Rosebrook House. Adrian watched from beneath the old oak trees. He heard enough. Whitmore spoke politely. Too politely. He offered financial rescue. He spoke of security, of stability, of generous arrangements. But every sentence carried the same meaning. Marriage in exchange for land. Before the conversation could continue, another carriage rolled through the estate gates. This one carried the Blackthorn family crest. The servants froze. Mr. Wallace stepped down first. Behind him came two lawyers carrying leather cases filled with official documents. Whitmore's confident smile disappeared. Adrian removed his worn gardener's jacket. For the first time since arriving at Rosebrook, he stood once again as the Earl of Blackthorn. No disguise. No false name. Only truth. He approached the gathering calmly. "Good afternoon." Mr. Hart stared in astonishment. "My lord." Whitmore looked from Adrian to the documents. "What is the meaning of this?" Adrian answered quietly. "It means Rosebrook Estate is no longer for sale." One lawyer unfolded several papers. Earlier this morning, the Earl of Blackthorn legally purchased every outstanding debt owed by Rosebrook Estate. The second lawyer continued. "All debts have been forgiven." Mr. Hart looked speechless. Whitmore stepped forward. "You cannot simply interfere. I already have. You've ruined months of negotiation." "There was never a negotiation." "There was." Adrian's gray eyes remained calm. "You were negotiating with desperation." Silence covered the courtyard. Adrian looked toward Mr. Hart. "No payment is expected. No marriage. No conditions. I simply ask that your family remain exactly where they belong." Mr. Hart's eyes filled with tears. "My lord, I cannot repay such generosity. You owe me nothing." Whitmore clenched his jaw. "This isn't over." Adrian looked directly into his eyes. "It is." The lawyers handed Whitmore copies of the legal documents. Every path he had planned had vanished. Without another word he climbed back into his carriage. Within moments the sound of departing wheels disappeared beyond the gates. 3 weeks passed. Autumn slowly painted the countryside gold. Leaves gathered beneath ancient trees. Morning frost silvered the gardens. Adrian returned to Blackthorn Manor. He buried himself in estate work. Meetings, letters, accounts. None of it quieted his thoughts. Every rose reminded him of Eleanor. Every sunrise reminded him of Rosebrook. He had saved her home, yet somehow lost the person who had made it feel alive. Wallace found him one afternoon standing alone beside the manor gardens. "You miss her." Adrian smiled sadly. "I miss the woman who believed I was simply a gardener." "You were. For a little while." "No." Wallace shook his head. "You became one." At Rosebrook Estate life slowly returned. Workers repaired broken fences. The orchard flourished. The gardens bloomed brighter than they had in years. Yet Eleanor often found herself walking toward the old rose beds. She remembered the quiet stranger who had worked beside her. The man who laughed over muddy boots. Who repaired wheelbarrows. Who listened more than he spoke. The Earl had deceived her. But the gardener had been real. One evening Thomas, the stable boy, hurried toward her carrying exciting news. "Miss Eleanor." "What is it?" "I was delivering grain near Blackthorn. And I saw the Earl." She waited. "He wasn't giving orders. He was planting trees. By himself." She smiled despite herself. "Really?" And his hands were covered in mud. That night she slept very little. By sunrise she had made her decision. Blackthorn Manor stood quiet beneath clear autumn skies. Adrian knelt beside a row of young oak trees, pressing fresh soil around their roots. His sleeves were rolled above his elbows. His boots were muddy. His gloves were worn. Exactly as they had been at Rosebrook. Footsteps approached. He looked up. Eleanor stood only a few yards away. She wore the same faded green dress he remembered. The morning breeze lifted loose strands of her chestnut hair. For several moments neither of them spoke. Finally she smiled. "A gardener should water those roots before packing the soil." He laughed softly. "I wondered whether you'd correct me again." "I probably always will." He stood. "I'm glad." Silence settled comfortably between them. "I was angry," she said. "I know. I still dislike that you lied." "So do I." She studied him carefully. "But I also realized something." "What?" "I never fell in love with an Earl." His breath caught. "I fell in love with the man who repaired broken fences. The one who carried stones. The one who believed flowers deserved a second chance." She stepped closer. "And when Thomas told me he found the Earl doing exactly those things." She smiled warmly. "I realized they were the same man." Adrian looked at her quietly. "I cannot change how we began." "No. But I promise every day afterward will be honest." She reached for his hand. Her fingers settled gently against his roughened palm. "No titles today. None. No promises because of money. Never. No obligations. Only one question." He knelt before her, not as an earl before a lady, but simply as one person before another. Eleanor Hart. He looked into her eyes. Would you spend your life beside the man who once borrowed a gardener's name? Tears filled her eyes again. This time they carried joy. Yes. She laughed softly through those tears. But only if you promise to keep gardening. I promise. And you'll let me tell you when you're pruning roses the wrong way. I suspect that will happen often. She pulled him to his feet. Above them the autumn wind carried golden leaves across the gardens. Nearby, the very first rose bush they had planted together swayed gently beneath the afternoon sun. Months later, visitors to Blackthorn Manor often found the Earl and his Countess working side by side among the flowers. Many wondered why the Earl preferred worn gloves over jeweled rings while tending the gardens. Only Eleanor knew. Some truths were discovered in grand halls. Others were found with muddy boots, honest hands and a borrowed name. And every spring, when the roses bloomed brighter than the year before, Adrian would smile quietly, remembering the greatest lesson of his life. A title might open a gate, but only truth could open a heart.